Listen to me carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will make your blood run cold and your hands shake with rage. Officer Briggs crushed that woman's wrist against the diner booth like he was breaking kindling, dragged her across that greasy floor like she was nothing more than garbage, and kicked her German shepherd so hard in the ribs that you could hear the breath leave that poor animal's lungs. And you know what happened? Nothing. Not one person moved. Not one soul spoke up. They all just sat there, cutting their pancakes and sipping their coffee, thinking she was just another drifter passing through their miserable little town. But she wasn't just anybody. She was a Navy SEAL. And the mistake they made that day would burn their entire corrupt department to the ground like the house of cards it always was. Before we go any further, I need you to tell me where you're watching this from. And if you've ever seen someone abuse their power, if you've ever watched evil win while good people stayed silent, you must hit that like button and subscribe right now. Because stories like this get buried, and the only way truth survives is if people like you refuse to let it die. Comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you believe evil shouldn't win. Because what happened in that godforsaken town will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. The rain was coming down like God's own fury that October morning, drumming against the windows of Miller's Diner with the kind of relentless rhythm that makes you think the world is ending. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered over chrome countertops slick with years of accumulated grease, the kind that no amount of scrubbing could ever make clean again. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and that sharp, chemical stench of cheap floor bleach that burns your nostrils and makes your eyes water. In the back corner booths, local farmers and truck drivers hunched over their plates, whispering to each other in voices so low you had to strain to hear them. But they weren't talking about the weather or the harvest or the price of diesel. They were talking about her. The woman sitting alone in booth 7 with her back pressed against the wall and her eyes constantly moving, scanning every reflection in the napkin dispenser, every shadow in the mirror behind the counter, every face that walked through that door. Her name was Cassie Trent, and she was more dangerous than every person in that diner combined. But you wouldn't know it to look at her. She sat there calm as still water, her hands folded on the table, her breathing so controlled it was almost supernatural. This was a woman who had crawled through Iraqi sand dunes with bullets whistling over her head, who had rappelled down the sides of buildings in Afghanistan while insurgents tried to blow her to pieces, who had stared death in the face so many times that peace was the most terrifying thing she'd ever encountered. At her feet lay Ghost, a German shepherd whose muscles rippled like steel cables under his dark fur. A jagged scar ran across his muzzle from a Taliban knife that had tried to silence him forever but failed. Ghost's ears were perpetually alert, rotating like radar dishes, cataloging every sound, every movement, every threat. His tail lay perfectly still against the dirty linoleum floor, but his eyes never stopped moving. He was a weapon disguised as a pet, and, just like his handler, he was more dangerous because he was calm. The people in that diner had no idea what they were looking at. They saw a tired woman with road dust on her boots and a dog that looked like it had seen better days. They didn't see the Navy SEAL who had spent 8 years hunting terrorists in the darkest corners of the world. They didn't see the K-9 handler who could coordinate a tactical strike with nothing but hand signals and a whistle. They saw vulnerability where they should have seen lethal precision. And that's when the devils walked through the door. 3 of them, wearing badges that might as well have been made of tin foil for all the honor they represented. Officer Briggs led the pack, a man whose gut hung over his gun belt like a badge of his own corruption, whose eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had discovered that power without accountability was the most addictive drug on earth. Behind him came Officers Martinez and Kelly, younger men who had learned to feed on fear like vultures, who had forgotten that those badges were supposed to protect the innocent, not terrify them. They swaggered into Miller's Diner like they owned the place. Because they did. They owned the diner, they owned the town, They owned every soul stupid enough to call this place home. And they were about to make sure everyone remembered it. Briggs spotted Ghost immediately, and his lips curled into the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. "Well, well, well," he said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "What do we have here? Looks like someone brought their mud into our establishment." Ghost didn't move, didn't growl, didn't even lift his head. But every muscle in his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. "That's a dangerous-looking animal," Martinez chimed in, pulling out his nightstick and slapping it against his palm. "Might need to be put down for public safety." And then Kelly did something that made my blood run cold just thinking about it. He walked to the counter, picked up the coffee pot that had been sitting on the burner for God knows how long, the kind of coffee that's so hot it could strip paint, and he walked over to where Ghost was lying. And he poured that boiling coffee right onto Ghost's front paws. The sound that dog made wasn't a bark or a whimper. It was pure, concentrated pain-given voice. Ghost jerked his paws back, but he didn't attack. He had been trained too well, disciplined too thoroughly. He just stared up at Kelly with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to ask, why? Cassie didn't move, didn't speak. Her hands remained folded on the table, but if you looked closely, you could see her knuckles were white as bone. Inside her chest, something dark and terrible was awakening, something that had been forged in the crucible of war and tempered by years of watching evil triumph while good people did nothing. If this made your blood boil, if the sight of an innocent animal being tortured for sport makes you want to put your fist through a wall, hit that like button right now. Because no creature, human or animal, deserves to suffer for someone else's entertainment. In the corner booth, an old woman named Etta Daly watched it all with eyes like a hanging judge. Etta had been coming to Miller's Diner every Tuesday morning for 37 years, and she had seen this town transform from a place where neighbors helped each other to a place where everyone looked the other way. She had watched 3 police chiefs come and go, each one more corrupt than the last, until finally the current chief arrived, Briggs' cousin, and turned the department into his personal shakedown operation. Etta slid her ancient flip phone out of her purse and started recording. Her hands were shaking with arthritis and rage, but she held that phone steady as she whispered to Cassie, "They do this every week. Not just to animals. To people. Kidnapping, extortion, theft. They take whatever they want and nobody stops them because the chief is their cousin and the mayor is their uncle. This whole town is their personal kingdom and we're all just serfs waiting for the next beating." Her voice was barely audible, but Cassie caught every word. And with each syllable, that dark thing in her chest grew stronger. Etta's eyes darted around the diner to make sure nobody was watching, then she leaned closer. 3 people have disappeared in the last 2 months. Just gone. Poof. And when their families ask questions, they get told to mind their own business, or they might disappear too. We're all afraid. All of us. This is systemic corruption, the kind that rots a place from the inside out like gangrene. These weren't just bad cops having a bad day. These were predators who had discovered that a badge could be a license to destroy lives. But Cassie was about to show them that some people don't stay afraid forever. Over the next 2 hours, Cassie sat in that diner and watched a masterclass in small-town terrorism. She watched Briggs walk up to a family with 3 small children and inform the father that his car had been flagged for safety violations and would need to be impounded immediately, unless he could pay a $500 inspection fee in cash. Right now. She watched Martinez corner the diner's owner and explain that the police protection fee for his establishment had been raised to $200 a week, payable in unmarked bills, or else they might have trouble responding to emergency calls at his business. She watched Kelly approach a teenage girl bussing tables and tell her that someone had reported her for suspicious behavior and that she would need to come to the station for questioning unless her manager could make it worth their while to forget the whole thing. And, through it all, the people of that town just took it. They paid the bribes. They handed over their cash. They watched their neighbors get shaken down and thanked God it wasn't happening to them. But the worst was yet to come. Around noon, a man stumbled into the diner. His clothes were tattered, his face was dirty, and he smelled like he hadn't seen a shower in weeks. He was clearly homeless, probably hungry, definitely harmless. He approached the counter and asked, in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, if there was any work he could do in exchange for a meal. That's when all 3 officers surrounded him like wolves around a wounded deer. "Sir, we've had reports of vagrancy and public disturbance," Briggs announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're going to need to come with us." "But I haven't done anything wrong," the man protested, his voice cracking with fear. "That's for us to decide," Martinez said, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back. They dragged him out of that diner like he was a dangerous criminal instead of a human being whose only crime was being poor. Through the window, Cassie watched them shove him into the back of their squad car with no paperwork, no rights read, no legal process whatsoever. Etta leaned over and whispered, "That's the 3rd one this month. They take them out to the county storage facility. Nobody ever sees them again." If you believe someone should stand up for the innocent, if you believe that evil only wins when good people stay silent, subscribe to this channel right now so stories like this can spread and the truth can't be buried. That night, Cassie made camp in the woods outside town and began her preparation. Most people think a Navy SEAL is just someone who's good at shooting guns and kicking down doors. But the real power of a SEAL isn't in their muscles, it's in their mind. It's in their ability to turn every disadvantage into an advantage, every weakness into strength, every moment of apparent defeat into the setup for total victory. Cassie knew that Ghost's service harness contained more than just identification tags. Hidden within the fabric were micro cameras with night vision capability, encrypted communication devices that could transmit live video to servers halfway around the world, and GPS tracking that was accurate to within 6 inches. Ghost wasn't just her companion, he was a mobile surveillance platform that could go places no human could reach. For 3 days, Ghost became a ghost in truth. He slipped under fences, crawled through drainage culverts, and positioned himself where he could record every corrupt transaction, every illegal payoff, every moment of criminal conspiracy. Cassie watched the feeds from her laptop in the woods, building a digital case file that would have made FBI investigators weep with joy. She recorded Briggs meeting with local business owners and collecting protection money, like some kind of backwoods mob boss. She captured Martinez and Kelly stripping parts from impounded vehicles and selling them to chop shops 3 counties over. She documented the mayor signing blank arrest warrants and handing them over to be filled in later. But the most damning evidence came when Ghost followed their patrol car to the county storage facility and recorded what happened to the homeless people they had been arresting. They weren't being booked. They weren't being processed. They were being held in metal shipping containers without food, water, or medical care until they agreed to sign confessions to crimes they had never committed. And if they refused to sign, well, the containers were soundproof and nobody came looking for homeless people. Cassie had seen war crimes in Afghanistan that were less brutal than what these badge-wearing terrorists were doing to their own people. By Sunday morning, she had enough evidence to destroy not just the police department, but half the city government. But evidence wasn't enough. These men had operated with impunity for so long that they believed themselves untouchable. They needed to learn that some people don't touch. So Cassie did something that took more courage than charging a machine gun nest. She walked back into Miller's diner and sat down in the booth marked "Reserved for Police Only." The silence that fell over that diner was like the moment before an avalanche. Every conversation stopped. Every fork froze halfway to every mouth. Even the coffee pot seemed to stop percolating. Cassie sat with her back to the wall, Ghost lying at her feet facing the door, and waited. She didn't have to wait long. When those 3 officers walked through the door and saw her sitting in their booth, The rage that exploded across their faces was like watching demons remember what they really were. Briggs' hand went to his gun before he even thought about what he was doing. Martinez cracked his knuckles like he was about to enjoy himself. Kelly started breathing heavy through his nose like a bull about to charge. "Lady," Briggs said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury, "you are sitting in the wrong seat." "Am I?" Cassie asked, her voice calm as a mountain lake. "That booth is reserved for law enforcement only," Martinez snarled, stepping closer. "I can see that," Cassie replied. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't show 1 ounce of the fear they were accustomed to seeing. That's when Kelly lost what was left of his mind. He grabbed Cassie by the hair and yanked her to her feet with such violence that several people in the diner gasped out loud. He slammed her face down on the table, sending coffee cups and silverware clattering to the floor. The sound of her head hitting the formica was like a gunshot in the sudden silence. "Maybe this will teach you some respect," Kelly growled, pressing her face against the table. Ghost started to rise, every muscle in his body coiled for attack, but Cassie gave him a hand signal that meant stay. Because she wasn't the victim here. She was the trap. And these fools had just walked right into it. Briggs pulled out his service weapon and pointed it at Ghost's head. "That's a dangerous animal you got there. Might need to be put down for threatening a police officer. If you would fight to protect your dog, if you would stand up to corruption even when it meant risking everything, leave a comment saying, 'I stand with Ghost,' and let these bullies know they picked the wrong fight." They didn't arrest her. Didn't read her rights. Didn't file any paperwork or call for backup or follow any of the legal procedures that separate civilization from barbarism. They just grabbed her and Ghost and threw them into the back of their squad car like they were hauling garbage to the dump. "Where are we going?" Cassie asked, though she already knew. "Somewhere quiet," Briggs said, catching her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Somewhere nobody comes looking." The county storage facility was exactly what it sounded like, a collection of abandoned warehouses and metal buildings where the county used to store road equipment before the budget cuts. Now it was just a collection of empty buildings with no electricity, no cameras, and no oversight. The perfect place for 3 corrupt cops to make someone disappear. They dragged Cassie into a windowless concrete room that smelled like motor oil and despair. Ghost was locked in a metal cage in what used to be a kennel, with a cattle prod hanging on the wall nearby like a promise of pain to come. "Here's how this works," Briggs said, handcuffing Cassie to a pipe that ran along the wall. "You're going to confess to whatever we decide you did wrong. Drug possession, assault on a police officer, resisting arrest. We got blank confession forms, and we're going to fill them in however we want." "And if I refuse?" Cassie asked. Martinez laughed. "Then you become another missing person. Another case that never gets solved. Another family that learns to stop asking questions." They left her there, handcuffed to that pipe in a room with no windows and no hope, while they went to process the paperwork. As if there was any paperwork to process. As if this was anything other than kidnapping with badges. For 2 hours, Cassie sat in that concrete tomb and listened to Ghost whimpering in the next room. She thought about all the people these monsters had brutalized, all the families they had destroyed, all the innocent souls who had suffered while the rest of the world looked away. But mostly, she smiled. Because these idiots had just committed a federal crime against a United States naval officer. And they had done it while being recorded by surveillance equipment they didn't even know existed. When they came back, Briggs was carrying a blank confession form and a pen. Martinez had brass knuckles on his right hand. Kelly was dragging the cattle prod behind him like some kind of medieval torture device. "Last chance," Briggs said. "Sign the confession, or we start with your dog." That's when Cassie said the words that would haunt these men for the rest of their miserable lives. "Before you hurt me or my dog, there's something you should know. You've been live streaming to the Department of Defense for the last 72 hours. The confusion on their faces would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. 3 grown men, suddenly looking like children who had been caught stealing cookies from the jar. "What are you talking about?" Briggs demanded. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Cassie Trent, United States Navy SEALs. This dog is federal military property. This facility is now under federal jurisdiction. And you three have just committed assault on a federal officer, kidnapping of military personnel, and about a dozen other charges that carry mandatory minimum sentences." The color drained out of their faces like someone had opened a valve. "You're lying," Martinez whispered, but his voice cracked like a teenager asking a girl to prom. Ghost's collar contains military-grade surveillance equipment that has been transmitting your crimes in real time to Norfolk Naval Base, the FBI, and the Department of Defense. Every word you've spoken, every crime you've committed, every life you've destroyed, it's all been recorded and uploaded to servers that you couldn't hack with 100 years and a team of computer geniuses. Kelly dropped the cattle prod. The clang of metal hitting concrete echoed through the room like the sound of justice arriving. Furthermore, Cassie continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, assault on federal military personnel during the commission of a federal crime qualifies as domestic terrorism under the Patriot Act. Which means you don't get lawyers. You don't get phone calls. You get black sites and enhanced interrogation until you tell us everything about every corrupt deal you've made with every criminal you've ever protected. Briggs started hyperventilating. Martinez sat down on a crate and put his head in his hands. Kelly looked like he was about to throw up. "But wait," Cassie said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect from warriors in the deadliest places on earth. "There's more." And that's when the cavalry arrived. The sound started like distant thunder, then grew into the roar of justice incarnate. Military police vehicles, state patrol cars, FBI trucks, and internal affairs investigators converged on that storage facility like the wrath of God descending from heaven. Helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights turning the abandoned buildings into a stage where the final act of this tragedy would play out. The doors exploded inward and armed federal agents swarmed into those concrete rooms like they were taking down an Al-Qaeda stronghold. These weren't small-town cops who could be bought with a handshake and an envelope full of cash. These were professionals who had taken oaths that actually meant something. Ghost was freed from his cage by a federal K-9 handler who checked him for injuries and whispered apologies in his ears. Cassie was uncuffed by an FBI agent who looked at the marks on her wrists with the kind of anger that usually preceded someone getting their head knocked clean off their shoulders. Briggs, Martinez, and Kelly were tackled to the ground with such force that you could hear the breath leave their lungs from the next building over. Federal marshals slapped handcuffs on them so tight that their fingers started turning purple within minutes. But the sweep didn't stop there. The mayor was arrested at his office while counting bribe money. The police chief was dragged out of his house in his underwear while trying to flush evidence down the toilet. County commissioners, city council members, and half the local judiciary were rounded up in a coordinated operation that dismantled an entire network of corruption in less than 4 hours. Their badges were ripped from their shirts in front of the whole town. Their guns were confiscated. Their patrol cars were impounded as evidence. Everything they had used as symbols of their authority was stripped away until they were revealed for what they really were, cowards in costumes who had forgotten that real power comes from protecting people, not terrorizing them. As they were being loaded into federal transport vehicles, Etta Daly stepped forward with her flip phone in her arthritic hands. "Agent," she called out to the FBI supervisor. "I've been recording these men for months. Every bribe, every threat, every crime. I saved it all." She handed over a plastic bag filled with memory cards, photographs, and written logs that documented years of systematic corruption. "I also have the names and locations of everyone they made disappear. The homeless people, the witnesses, the troublemakers. Some of them might still be alive." The FBI agent looked at that old woman like she had just handed him the Holy Grail. because in a way, she had. She had handed him justice. Cassie returned to Miller's diner the next morning, ghost trotting beside her like nothing had ever happened. When she sat down in the booth that used to be reserved for police only, the diner owner personally brought her coffee and a steak for Ghost, both on the house. "That table belongs to the people now," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. And it always will. One by one, people approached her table. They shook her hand, thanked her for her service, told her stories about the abuse they had suffered and the fear they had lived with. Farmers whose equipment had been stolen. Business owners who had been bankrupted by bribes. Families who had lost loved ones to a system that valued power over people. But mostly, they thanked her for proving that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. If you wish someone like Cassie would walk into your town and clean house, if you believe that heroes still exist in this broken world, share this video right now. Because it helps more than you know. It reminds people that courage is contagious, that standing up to bullies is possible, and that sometimes one person really can make all the difference. The trials took 2 years. Briggs got 25 to life for kidnapping, assault, and racketeering. Martinez got 15 years for conspiracy and civil rights violations. Kelly got 12 years because he cooperated with investigators and helped them find the bodies of the people who hadn't survived their questioning. The mayor died in federal prison before his trial was complete, but not before he gave up the names of every corrupt official in 3 counties. The police chief got life without parole when they found the mass grave behind the storage facility where 17 people had been buried after asking too many questions or refusing to pay tribute to the local warlords. But the real victory wasn't in the convictions or the prison sentences. The real victory was in Miller's diner on Tuesday mornings, when Etta Daly would sit in her corner booth and smile at the new police officers, real police officers who had sworn real oaths and meant them. Who came in for coffee and actually paid for it. The real victory was in the children who could walk to school without fear, the business owners who could operate without paying tribute, the homeless people who could ask for help without disappearing forever. The real victory was in the proof that evil only wins when good people stay silent. That corruption only thrives when citizens refuse to fight back. That sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stand up and say, "Not here. Not today. Not ever again." As I finish telling you this story, I want you to remember something. This didn't happen in some distant country or some other time. This happened right here in America in our time. There are more Miller's diners out there. More corrupt police departments. More towns where bullies with badges terrorize the innocent while everyone looks the other way. But there are also more Cassie Trents. More people with the courage to fight back. More ghosts ready to stand beside them. More Etta Dalys willing to document the truth even when it puts them in danger. The question isn't whether evil exists, we all know it does. The question is what you're going to do about it. Are you going to be the person who looks away when someone gets hurt? Or are you going to be the person who stands up, speaks out, and refuses to let evil win? Protect the powerless. Defend the innocent. Stand up to bullies even when you're afraid. Because justice isn't something that happens to us, it's something we do. It's something we choose. It's something we fight for every single day. If you believe in justice, if you believe that good can triumph over evil, if you believe in God's protection for those who stand up for what's right, type Amen in the comments right now and subscribe for more stories like this. Because the world needs more people who refuse to stay silent. The world needs more heroes. The world needs more people like Cassie Trent who understand that sometimes the most powerful weapon against evil isn't a gun or a badge, it's the simple refusal to be afraid. And remember this, somewhere out there, in some small town where corruption has taken root and fear has silenced the innocent, there's a diner where bullies think they're untouchable. But they're wrong. Because heroes walk among us and they're closer than you think. Justice is coming. The only question is whether you'll be part of it.